I have chosen the best friend's brother as the anchor for this confession. I am 32 and my life seems calm on the surface. A steady job, a small house with lemon-scented counters, and a husband who smiles at my jokes even when they fail. My best friend, Mara, is the sister of that husband and the keeper of every quiet fear I have never spoken aloud. Mara's brother, Daniel, is 20 years older than me and freshly divorced. A fact that sits on him like a coat too heavy to shed. He arrived at the lakeside cabin with a bag of tools and a tired sigh, saying he needed to unwind, to find a way to lay down the burden of the life he had tried so hard to build. We were left alone when Mara drove away to talk with a cousin who needed quiet after a harsh week, and the house settled around us like a held breath. The first night I heard his voice in the kitchen, the way he spoke softly to the kettle as if the steam carried his troubles with it, and I felt the air shift between us, careful and almost ceremonial, as if we both knew something was shifting in a place we had promised never to go. I want to tell you how I smelled the rain on the window and the garlic from a late supper that still hung in the air, how his hands moved with awkward patience, how his eyes kept returning to the line of my jaw as I spoke about work and weather and small, ordinary things that suddenly sounded like a confession in a church where I never intend to confess anything. We had built a life that felt perfectly safe, or at least safe enough to endure the dull ache that sits behind every long marriage, the ache that asks you to stay when your feet want to walk in a different direction. Marcus, my husband, is kind in the way a slow river is kind, steady, reliable, easing toward a purpose with quiet, persistent effort. He does not see every layer of me the way Mara's brother does, because he does not live with the secret chords I hear when the room grows dim, and someone speaks my name with a touch of vulnerability that makes me tremble. The weekend was meant to be a restoration, not a collision. But the moment Daniel walked into the kitchen with his coffee mug and the stubborn sun on his cheek, something delicate and bright began to unravel in the dry cloth of my life. The weekend was a test I did not know I was taking, a trial in which I pretended not to notice the tremor that ran through him whenever I brushed against him by accident, or when our shoulders touched as we walked across the wooden deck to watch the lake glow under the pale blue morning light. The inciting incident came on a gray afternoon when the boards creaked and the wind shook the blinds. We found ourselves alone in the cabin's back room, a space cluttered with old photos and a bird clock that trembled with every passing hour. He spoke of his divorce with a clumsy honesty that surprised me. A man wide open, careful with his words, careful with the way he looked at me, as if I might betray him with a single breath. I admitted that my marriage was not the tapestry I had imagined in the early days. That I sometimes counted the hours until Marcus's late returns would end our long, quiet evenings. He listened, not with pity, but with a mirror held up to my own face. And in that looking glass, I found a reflection I had not allowed myself to see for a long time. The possibility of a different ending. One where fear no longer called the shots. The moment of betrayal did not arrive with a kiss or a reckless promise. We spoke of restraint and consequences, of the fragile line between care and danger, of loyalty to a life that was not all mine to suddenly redraw. Then, in the hush after our words cooled, a touch lingered, the barest brush of his fingers along my forearm as he handed me a mug. A hand lingering on the small of my back as he guided me toward the window where the lake carried the day in its glassy shifts. If this confession has you on the edge of your seat, hit like and share because you will not believe what happens next. We may pretend the moment never happened, and yet the moment keeps returning, like a tide that refuses to retreat. The days that followed were a slow breath between thunder and rain, a slow realization that I could not pretend forever, that my heart was made only for what was safe. The more I watched Daniel repair the leaky porch rail, the more the world around us blurred its edges, until I could not tell where his breath began and where mine ended. I began to see him not as the chaotic weekend guest, but as the one person who could understand the language my heart had learned when no one was listening. A language that spoke of aging hearts, finding a calm harbor instead of rough seas. And yet I clung to the old vow I had given Marcus when we stood at the altar and promised to choose a life together, to choose him again and again, even when the road grew difficult, even when someone else offered a new map that looked brighter in the light of noon. The truth is, I was torn between a desperate loyalty and a new hunger, a hunger for a life lived with fewer excuses and more truth. Rising action found me caught between two versions of love, tender and dangerous, with the cabin's walls narrowing as the summer wore thin, and the lake began to turn gray with the weather's sigh. I imagined telling Marcus the truth, but faltered, each thought knocking against the fear of losing the world I had built with him, the quiet house and the routine that steadied me, even when it bored me. There is a line between honesty and ruin, and I practiced crossing it in minute steps, asking Daniel for nothing more than his cautious respect, while he offered nothing but a hopeful gentleness that asked me to consider a turn I had refused to map before. My nights were spent listening to the clock tick in the hall, the distant barking of a dog, the far-off whistle of a train, and the soft rain tapping at the windows like a patient hand that knows secrets better than speech. My mornings began with the scent of pine and coffee, and the memory of his words, the ones that told me he believed in a future where love did not need to hide, where two people could choose each other even when the world said they should not. This is where the past and the future collide, where I must choose what to save and what to release, and I feel the pull of a second chance tugging at me with a tenderness I cannot deny. If you want me to survive this ache, I tell myself, I must decide who I want to be when the sun rises again. And so I do something simple yet brave. I tell Marcus that I owe him the truth. I tell Daniel that I cannot pretend any longer, that the gap between us is only a quiet curiosity. The words spill like thawing ice, and the truth lands with a dull, heavy thud in the room we share. And he looks at me with the long, slow heartbreak of a man who has learned to survive without his own heart. Marcus does not shout. He does not throw things. He simply listens, and I hear the careful, measured breath he takes before he speaks. He speaks of the life we built, of the years we shared, of the quiet joy and the dull ache, and then he speaks of forgiveness, not for us, but for ourselves. The idea that sometimes love means letting go, even when the other person is a good part of your life. The words hurt, but they heal in the same breath. And in that healing, I discover a second chance I did not know I deserved, an opening to a road where my heart can breathe again. Daniel and I do not rush. We do not pretend there is no risk, but we choose to lean toward honesty and respect, to let time show whether a future is possible, whether the bond we share can mature into something that stands the test of days and seasons without shame or fear. In the end, the cabin is quiet once more, the lake a slate of pale blue and white, the air filled with the scent of rain on stone and the clean tang of the pine trees outside. We return to the world with wordless, careful steps, choosing to protect the life we shared while seeking something truer, something free of guilt, something worthy of the love that has found us filing through our days in quiet, hopeful ways. The pact we once made, the one that felt like a dare born of hunger and danger, has softened into a promise to grow apart or together, depending on what time reveals. I carry with me the memory of his touch and the way his eyes held mine with a dream in them, a dream I am not yet ready to name aloud. If love was a lesson, I am learning its